Hello and welcome to NewsClick. We were planning to do a story on the Indian Premier League last week, but by the time we got around to it, everything suddenly came to a boil, exposing the seamy underside of cricket in India, in the IPL in particular, given the heady mix of cricket, Bollywood, big business, and various other things that we will be discussing today. It looks as if what has happened now, the scandals that are erupting, are in a sense symptomatic of a wider malaise. To discuss these, we have with us today Shankar Raghuraman, Associate Editor of the Times of India, who is both an economist and a well-known sports commentator. Shankar, the scandal that we are witnessing now, perhaps, if not this one, something or the other of this kind was just waiting to happen.
Absolutely.
Given the structure of things, what do you think is the general structure or processes involved in the IPL which make scandals like this possible or imminent?
Well, to begin with, the fact that the structure of the IPL is such that one person becomes virtually lord and master of all that he surveys, with almost no accountability to anybody, and certainly no accountability to the public at large. That kind of situation, with the kind of money involved, I mean, I was reading somewhere today that the size of the IPL pie, as one of the newspapers put it, is $4.13 billion. Now, that's, to put it in rupees, about 18,500 crore. Now, you can see if there is an organization which is dealing with that kind of money and has no accountability whatsoever to a larger public, it would be asking for the moon to hope that there will be no scandals erupting from something like that. So, I think that at the bottom of the thing lies this complete lack of accountability to anybody.
Right. This lack of accountability stems from the structure of the Board of Control for Cricket in India, as well as its new baby, the IPL. And what we are witnessing in the IPL today was in fact already seen incipiently with the BCCI, which started seeing real money with the entry of the television era and the big advertising revenues. But this lack of accountability has been around with us for some time, hasn't it?
Very much so. In fact, as you were suggesting, the IPL has sort of carried the lack of accountability to its logical culmination. It's just as it has carried commercialization of cricket in India to its logical culmination. So, yes, the BCCI itself and its structure are as opaque as anything you could compare it with, and that's been a problem which has not quite been addressed for so many decades. And if there is any positive to come out of this whole IPL mess, it could be a new demand for some accountability, not just from IPL but from the BCCI itself.
Is there a possibility, as a fallout of all this, as we were discussing, that we could actually see in India a regulatory body to look at these affairs? Because how else do you bring accountability?
I don't see that as a possibility in the immediate future, because it's not just cricket. I mean, cricket, because it's the game that's most popular in India, receives some kind of attention, so we notice the fact that there's no accountability. But this is true of all sports bodies in India.
Yeah.
There's been no accountability to anybody for most, and which is why you have a peculiar situation in which virtually every sports body is run either by powerful politicians or by big business. I mean, where else in the world would you find, the archery federation being headed by a politician, or right, the football federation being headed by a politician?
There was a dispute, if you remember, a few years ago, where the BCCI actually went to court to prove that it was, or to claim that it was not a public body, but was a private body, and therefore not accountable in any form whatsoever. Yeah. Isn't that now even more reason to review the status of the BCCI and bring it into some form of public accountability?
Oh, definitely. The case for regulation of sports in general and cricket in particular in India is very strong. When I was saying that I don't see that happening, I was not for a moment trying to suggest that it should not happen.
Right.
It should happen, but I can't see it happening.
Just to follow up on the economics of the BCCI, when the auctions took place 3 years ago, and now with the scandals erupting, questions are also being raised about the first set of auctions. There were these astronomical prices fixed not only for the players but for the individual franchises as well. Nobody knows where these figures came from. Absolutely. Or the basis on which these figures were formed. Can you throw a little light on this aspect?
Well, a recent report has suggested that even in the first auction, the franchise auctions in 2008, basically every one of the bidders was told by Mr. Modi how much he should bid. So if those allegations are true, what it suggests is that the entire process was fixed. It's also interesting that franchisees are now talking about it 2.5 years after it happened. I mean, which suggests that they were also perfectly comfortable with this kind of fixed auction. So the answer to the question, where did these sums come out of? They came out of Mr. Modi's head, it would appear.
And people who bid for them, some of whom are Fortune 500 billionaires, includes the fourth richest man in the world and so on, they must have thought, they looked at these figures and thought, well, this is a reasonable amount of money I'm prepared to put into it, and taken a gamble on the kinds of returns that they were expecting. So would you agree with me if I said that these were purely speculative investments?
Oh, entirely. And I think for people like the gentleman you were referring to, the speculative part of the investment is also underwritten by the fact that even in a worst case scenario, there would be some positive spin-off for the brand. So even assuming that you don't actually make any money out of the franchise, how much more is it costing you than, let's say, sponsoring Indian cricket over a 10-year period?
This trend that we are talking about in cricket doesn't seem to me to be very different from trends which we see in business in general in India. We have seen these repeatedly in many sectors of the economy which have recently been opened up, in the airlines business or in telecommunications, where there is a lot of speculative investments made blind in that sense, in the hope of windfall profits, and very little regulation. Yeah. So do we see what is happening in cricket today as just one more instance of the way business is being done in India now?
Absolutely. I think that extension from cricket to the larger world of business in India is a very useful framework in which to look at this. I mean, the name of the game seems to be, you make, as you said, a blind investment, and if it doesn't work out, then the establishment will figure out a way of making it work for you. Right. I suppose the most obvious instance of that was in the telecom industry, when people bid crazy amounts to acquire licenses, and a few years down the line came crying to the government saying, these are figures we can't afford to pay, and so you need to move us away from a license fee kind of structure to a revenue sharing agreement, and the establishment went along. So that, I think, has established a precedent that you bid blind and it doesn't really matter if you've got it wrong, because Big Brother will come and help you out.
A last question on the business angles. Everyone today is speaking of this nexus between politics, business, sports, the movie industry. Knowing what we do about each of these spheres, with speculative money coming in, can crime be very far behind?
Well, if some of the allegations made by the dramatis personae in this whole theatre of the absurd are to be believed, Mr. Tharoor's aide has claimed that they got a death threat asking them to withdraw from this Kochi franchise. So whether or not that particular allegation is true, clearly the scope for that kind of thing is very much there. I mean, with the kind of money involved, with the opacity of the entire process, You're right. How far behind can crime be from this
And
situation?
especially if there are investments coming from offshore entities, from tax havens, you don't know the
God knows
source.
where they're coming from.
The seamy side of the Indian Premier League in cricket, its linkages with sports, the way business is done in India, I'm sure we are going to hear more about this in days to come. Please join us for the second segment of this program when we will discuss the implications of all this for cricket and for sports in India.